Chair. Call to order the March 29th regular meeting of the Wilton Board of Education. Has everyone had a chance to review the agenda?
Yes.
Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any approved? Any opposed? That's approved. We're down 2 people tonight, so we're going to have to be a little bit more vocal in approving making our motions. Has everyone had a chance to, do we have a consent agenda? Oh, okay, we're not there yet. Are we out of order?
No, you got to review and approve the
All right.
agenda.
Comments from the public.
As we do at every meeting, we would like to invite members of the public to come forward and offer any comments. Is there anyone who would like to take advantage of that opportunity? Seeing no one. Seeing no one. We have a guest tonight. We're pleased that Ms. Karen Klein from the Westport Board of Education is here tonight representing CABE Area 6. Thank you for coming all the way over.
Oh, there's no problem. I live right down the road. Is this the mic?
Please.
Please.
Okay, great. Okay, so good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me. So yes, I'm from the Westport Board of Education, and also I'm a co-director for Area 6. And I'm pleased to present an award to you. It is called the Bonnie Carey Award for Excellence in Educational Communication, and it is for your social media content. Now, to win this award, you need to have a clarity of message, image, and consistency, and the specific guidelines of readability, editing, graphics, type, and format. And I really enjoyed reading what you had. I enjoyed your notes from the board table. And Westport is just starting to do some social media, so I'm glad that I'll have such a good example to bring back to our board. So I just wanted to say a word about Bonnie. Bonnie was a lovely, lovely woman who worked for CABE for 47 years, and she died a couple of years ago, so they named this award in her honor. So that's all I have to say. I just wanted to say congratulations. I've got the award with me, and good work.
Thank you.
You're welcome. There you are.
Wow, that's really nice. It was very unexpected. But we're
Good.
really happy to have it. So
Oh,
thank you
good.
for
I'm so
coming all the
happy
way
for
to
you. Okay.
present it to us.
All right, thank
All
you.
right.
Happy
Thank
holiday,
Thanks.
everybody.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you.
Well, that's nice.
Congratulations.
Okay. Now the consent agenda. I knew it was there. Has everyone had a chance to review the consent agenda?
Yes.
Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second? Thank you, Debbie. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that's passed. Reports and recognition. Board chair report. Earlier this week, we presented our budget at the Board of Finance public hearing. And in doing so, we made a couple of key points. One, our budget has increased 1.43% over the last 4 years. Our current budget request of 2.24% is the lowest budget request of any school district in our DIRG. And third, we have reached the point where any further cuts to the budget will really put us in danger of doing damage to our core instruction and programming in the schools. The ball is now in the Board of Finance's court. So next Tuesday and Wednesday, the Board of Finance will be holding meetings to consider our budget and the Board of Selectmen's budget and to set the mill rate for next year. That's when they decide whether to accept our budget as is or to impose reductions. I can't say this strongly enough. Members of the community, if you support our schools, please take a few minutes to send a quick note to the Board of Finance and let them know that you support our schools and that you support having our budget adopted as it was presented earlier this week. The Board of Finance has been very clear that public input will be one of the factors they consider in making their final deliberation. So the more people who speak up, the stronger our case will be. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Superintendent's report.
Right, just a couple of items. Earlier this week, the board received an email questioning NESDEC's enrollment projection methodology. So earlier, I sent an email to you. I also sent it to the chairman of the Board of Finance with a document attached from Don Kennedy, who's one of the lead demographers at NESDEC, just explaining their methodology. If you have a chance to take a look at it, what you'll see very quickly is that their methodology is the industry standard. They do cohort survival, they look at all the factors that influence in-migration, and they also have been doing this work for 40 years, so there's really not much to say in terms of questioning the professional approach in which they do that work. So if you have a chance to look at it and
Great.
you want to do any follow-up questions, just let me know and I'll make that happen.
Thank you.
Also wanted to take a moment to thank the Parent Advisory Board and Kara Berghaus and all of those other parent volunteers who took time over this last month to plan a number of really thoughtful activities to raise awareness around disabilities. I had the pleasure of seeing these volunteers in action with our Cider Mill students just a few weeks ago, and actually got to participate in a couple of the stations that they had set up in the media center. So one simple activity they had students engage in was to put socks over their hands and then have them try and tie their shoes. And a second one, they had students read the names of colors that were printed in different colors. And I will tell you, two simple exercises that required a lot of effort. And those were just two very simple examples of many that they had set up at Cider Mill and at other schools. But I thought, taken all together, they really brought home the understanding of how so many of us take the ability to complete routine tasks for granted. So I thought it was really powerful for our students. Also wanted to recognize all of our students in the top inclusion models for their work. They took time to go visit some of the other schools and to promote that activity. So kind of on the last point, I think we're just very fortunate to have so many in this community who are so engaged and so dedicated to ensuring inclusive practices and building awareness and understanding. So really want to thank again our folks at the PAB. And then just the last point, I'm going to give, if you don't mind, the portion of my time away to Chuck, Gina, and Dr. Mitchell. We received a curriculum question yesterday, and it revealed that there was some confusion about what was happening in the third trimester in grades 4 and 5 at Cider Mill. So I'd like the other Dr. Smith, Dr. Mitchell, and Gina Dignon to just take a few minutes and talk through that.
Okay, so, yes, please. So I've been made aware that there's a lot of buzz going on around about this issue, and I have to say, and I realize this is a function of my age, but I am constantly amazed at the speed of electronic communication. But I'm equally mortified about how it seems to corrupt the process of meaningful dialogue around important issues. So we're glad to have this opportunity to have a face-to-face with you so that we can explain our thinking behind this decision. I think in the interest of time and simplicity, my hope is that you will take 3 big ideas away from this conversation. Number one, and this is important to us, that you understand that we made this decision in the best interest of our students and our teachers. And that second, the decision will result in students engaging in meaningful, authentic work. And third, that they are not going to be missing critical content. I'm dismayed, and I'm sure we all are, that message got muddled. But after some discussion among ourselves and with some parents today and some teachers, I think we have some ideas about how we can help repair that communication breakdown. And we'll share that with you in a minute. But first, I wanted Dr. Mitchell to talk a little bit about what it is we're doing with this unit and why, and then have Gina just very briefly share with us where we've been, where we are, and where we're going with social studies curriculum development, and how those things interact, and how challenges and problems can present opportunities for us. Okay?
First, I want any of the public out there just to know that on Wednesday, Gina and I will be available at Cider Mill at 9 o'clock if anybody has, 9 o'clock a.m. If anybody else has additional questions that we can clarify, because again, I do think that what you said is important. I think my attempt to be to the point, sometimes less is more, somehow got lost in communication, and so that is absolutely was not our intent, and so we're available for as long as needed to answer any questions that people have after tonight. So first, I want to start off with something that is very near and dear to my heart, which is something called test prep. So I think some of you may have heard my take on this. I am very passionate about this. I do not believe in test prep. I actually would not be working in a district that actually enforces test prep. That is something that I have a philosophical belief in, and so everything that I have here to say resides on that philosophical belief. And I think that, we termed the unit test readiness, and I think that it's a little bit of a misnomer, and we can talk more about really what it stands for, but let me tell you what's in it. First, there's all different purposes for reading, for writing, for researching, for thinking critically, and what is measured on our high-stakes test, the SBAC, is actually informational literacy. It's our students' ability to think critically on very short pieces of text, to be able to do research, to synthesize across text. There's a real purpose and a time and a place for that kind of thinking. So along the way, throughout our units of study, we are beginning to embed all of this type of thinking and learning into our curriculum. But there is a need, based on reflecting of our current status with our test scores, to be a little more purposeful and intentional with providing opportunities to get this type of thinking and work and tasks in front of our students. I'm going to go through what that looks like, but that's what this unit is. It is an opportunity for our students to practice the actual authentic experiences that they will be engaged in and what is measured on this assessment. By no means, and I will never be working in a school that is putting workbooks in front of students, that is putting students in front of test prep computer programs. We are, however, getting our kids in front of the computer because the reality is these assessments are taken on the computer. I don't know about you, but if any of you, I have a link to try out the SBAC. It is a different skill to sit in front of a computer, read a piece of text, respond, write a written response. So for any of you who have not gone through that process, I will be sharing a link with everybody on our website for you to go ahead and do so. Your eyes will be opened. So what we're doing through this unit is providing our students with an opportunity to have explicit experiences with what it means to take this form of assessment, both on the computer, and to have explicit instruction in activities such as extended response to short pieces of text. So students have to read and synthesize across multiple pieces of text to respond and come up with a critical answer. Students have to annotate. When they're actually taking the assessment, there are tools that allow them to highlight, to think critically kind of alongside the text so that they're able to then choose the best answer. What's really interesting about this assessment is students are provided with multiple answer choices that are correct. And so it is a very different experience to be sitting and going through the answers and to be critical thinkers and say, okay, what is this question actually asking me? What is the best answer? And how can I use evidence from the information that I just read to choose the best answer? And so it is a high-level thinking process that we are measuring on this assessment. So embedded into this unit that has caused such a commotion here, we have really looked at providing students with access to Newsella articles, which are very similar to short text that students will experience. Gina has, sorry, I keep every time.
I know that's a weird feedback.
That Italian in me when my hands are going, but Gina has kind of provided text sets that are aligned, and she could talk a little bit in a little bit. They are aligned to content of what would have been in the social studies third unit. So students are not going to miss content, which I'll explain a little bit in a second. But students are going to be required to do some close reading. They're going to be tackling higher level text. This is a computer adaptive text. The reality is when you are reading in the classroom, we know that best practices, students need to be reading at their independent level. So during much of their schooling time, we read text to grow readers at their independent reading level. Purpose, right? There's also a time and a place for having to read text that is slightly at a higher level. And that's what we're doing through this testing unit of study. Does that make sense? So students will be engaged with texts that are a little bit more difficult, a little bit more challenging, because there are certain skills that are required to process and to get through that kind of text.
And can I just add on
Sure.
that part of what we do throughout the year is build stamina with reading, and we realize that we need to actually also build that stamina with reading on a screen, because that's how the students are assessed. So we had the staff actually engage in taking the SBA for their grade level for ELA so that they can see and experience what the students need to do. And after they did that, they realized that we need to actually have some kind of lessons in place to not only build the stamina, but also to transfer what we've been doing all year long and what we continue to do to the format and the language that's presented to them on the assessment.
I'll just throw out some more concepts just so you can really feel assured that this is good content that is in this unit. There's discussion about character and theme, main idea and key detail. Like I said, across multiple texts, synthesizing across multiple texts. Written response and using evidence to support your thinking. The vocabulary that is utilized on the assessment is very academic in nature. And so there's a lot of work around looking at word connotation and making sure students understand different kinds of vocabulary that are evident on the assessment. Gina mentioned elaboration and stamina. Note-taking, I had said, is a big tool. So really what we're providing our students an opportunity to really hone in on information literacy skills as well as study skills that are important across all content areas, all academic areas, and really are lifelong skills. So as we kind of refine our curriculum, and you've heard Chuck talk about this extensively, that curriculum is an evolving process, and so as we embed a lot of this work into other units of study, this experience that we're providing for our students is actually critical. Now, I will speak to, some people have questioned, why don't we just do the old unit? So I'm just gonna kind of get out in front of that. So we'll have some more visuals and take more time for people to have questions around this on Wednesday, but we had to make the decision to implement all of the new units, not partial. So as we know, when we do partial curriculum implementation, we end up with gaps, overlaps, and things that are really hard to work through when you're dealing with cohorts of students. So we made a very conscious decision that we either had to do full implementation or really wait. And because the standards have changed with the state, and because, to be honest, social studies, and I've said this to the board, was really the last curriculum area to go through review. We do not have a unit of study to hand off to teachers. There are units that have been done for many, many years and are what I would call more of a tradition at Cider Mill, but they're not the units that we've been developing here in the district since I've arrived here 5 years ago. This is really the last core area to be looked at through the curriculum review process. Am I correct?
Well, yeah.
Right. And I guess when I came in, math was undergoing, so I feel like math has had some work. So the reality is, if we had, for example, done some old, some new, we would have students who maybe had run into the exact same content 2 years in a row. So you couldn't do part old, part new. It just would not have worked for our students logistically. And so we can talk more, and Gina could fill you in on how the work happens over the summertime and decisions that were made there. But I truly can sit in front of you knowing that what is happening with our students is meaningful. They will not be missing content. We've been very thoughtful with thinking of short text that will provide experiences. For example, fourth grade is current events. Our work with Newsella and what Fran has done with Newsella is we have been embedding that kind of work and that kind of thinking across all of our units. So students are not missing critical key content, and instead it's a value added in regard to the explicit focus on information literacy and study skills required to be successful going forward, as well as what's measured on the assessment. Any questions?
Thank you.
Yeah, and I feel badly because I think it really was an attempt to be less is more. It's kind of like, it's great to get in front of you and have the conversation, but it's a really hard thing to articulate. It's a very complex process that we're involved in,
Right.
and I do feel badly if my, attempt to communicate was a little undone, but
No, did you have something?
Yeah,
sure.
question. If we had been prepared fully with the curriculum for this third, or whatever it is, we would have gone forward with that. Okay.
This work still would have happened.
Yeah.
Pardon?
This
Work
works.
still would have happened.
Well, how would we have done that, assuming the curriculum was a full, fully? I get the importance of what you're doing in terms
Sorry.
of not test prep or whatever, you're getting the students in front of the computer, getting, that's critical.
Transfer
Right.
work.
Okay, so I guess what I'm confused about is if we had had the curriculum fully developed, so we had the full year done, when would we have done the work that you talked about doing?
Yep.
Because if we didn't do that, I mean, I
Yeah.
guess that's where I'm trying, I'm really
No,
confused.
it's a really good question. So over the last few years, we've been trying to integrate the test, I'm going to call it readiness. I'm going to
Right.
never use that word again.
Okay.
But these types of skills, because you can see it's not just getting ready for an assessment, these types of skills very intentionally during small pockets during ELA. As we've been looking and really analyzing our data, which you guys have been part of at the board level, we've really not been happy with where we are and really have reflected and tried to figure out, our teachers are doing the right work, right? We've got the right pieces in place. So what do we need to tweak? And along the way this year, through all of our discourse and reflection, we've really surmised one of the strategies is to be a little more explicit in this. So I will say that we've kind of used an opportunity for the third unit. Right now we have teachers. We all know that when teachers are involved in the curriculum development method, there's more buy-in, right? And the reality is we did not have enough teachers over the summertime to do the massive amounts of work. So we got one unit barely done. You guys can correct me, you're more involved in this.
Right, so we do rely on teacher teams to develop the curriculum, which is a tradition here, and I think that not only does it help with buy-in, but it provides teachers with leadership opportunities, and it also, they offer an insight that's really critical.
For the
So
students.
I don't want to change that tradition, but the reality is for elementary school teachers, they're teaching everything, and we have to balance how we're rolling things out and how we're creating and developing. So we developed the first unit over the summer and finished it with our teams earlier this year. And through release time, we've been able to develop the other unit of study. But it became somewhat of a burden to keep pulling teachers out of class away from their students to continue the development for this year. So we made the decision to wait until this coming summer to develop that third unit and then use this time as an opportunity. But please know that I have already circulated some text sets that align to these units of study to
The upcoming.
Yeah, to the curriculum teams and also the team leaders for their review. And I'm working with Fran because she's also using something called Discover in the Destiny to help curate further materials so that students will have opportunity to interact and read across sets in the content area. And we'll be providing them with guiding questions, and they'll have a chance to apply all the note-taking skills and the nonfiction reading skills that they've been practicing all year with that content. So,
I mean, I'm going to be honest, Glenn. This really was one of those times where things just worked out the way they needed to. We needed to put a pause on the pace. I needed my teachers in the classroom with the students, and, you know, I made a decision that I thought was in the best interest of the kids, and
Oh,
Yeah.
I think it was, what confuses me, or what concerns me, is that had we had the curriculum fully developed, then this test readiness work,
it would have been
would have
pushed, it would have been pushed into everything else, and so this
reading,
is
writing,
a-
math,
yeah.
it would have been pushed into those blocks.
Which
So-
is why
Yeah.
it's kind of one of those things that just, it all worked out.
yeah, no, I think so, but I just, that,
Yeah.
if we had the curriculum there, and it was
Yeah.
fully developed, then we would have been pressured or really against, you know, whatever, to get the test readiness work done.
And again, I think that this year was a lot of thinking about, you know, we're doing good work, but yet our scores are here. What do we need to do differently? And so we've been evolving in our thinking along the way. So we took advantage of an
Well,
opportunity.
no, I think it's great,
Yeah.
what you're doing, I think it's going.
But also, to
yeah.
your point, next year, all of these kind of skills are gonna be more heavily
Yeah.
embedded into the unit so that we're not
Yeah.
having to push or pull
Okay.
or anything.
And we're trying, Fran and I are actually, and Trudy are trying to coordinate the summer work now so that we can, you know, for going forward. But I think we are gonna run into some difficulty because of the length of the school year. So, we're gonna
There's a lot
try
to
our
do.
best, but we're going
lot to
to
do.
also involve the LLC staff because
They're
of the
a critical
information
piece of
literacy.
this.
So,
Yes, absolutely.
we really are moving forward with that integration, so.
I think my concern, first of all, thank you for coming tonight and explaining, and I, like Glenn, fully support the readiness and the, you know, the understanding of what the exercises on SBAC are gonna ask, and the transition and the transfer and all of that. My question is a little different. It has more to do with the actual curriculum writing. I'm just, as a board member, wanting to know a little bit more, and not tonight, but maybe as we look at next year's plan, you know, that we don't over-promise or overburden the teachers in terms of if there aren't enough teachers to write the curriculum, that we don't assume
And
that.
I agree with that, and I think that last summer, you know, I coordinated over 24 curriculum projects last summer. So that's too many. And so we need to really prioritize that.
Right, so some of it's the pacing, and then just from the outside looking in, I would prefer as little release time of teachers as possible to write curriculum. I really do think that that should be a summer task or maybe a
agree.
PD task, but not a pull the teacher out of the
Yeah.
classroom.
Well,
We've
we've
talked
been
about
having a
that.
lot of discussions around that because we really value the teacher input, but we're wondering if we need to get the teacher input at a different level of the curriculum development. So they should be, I think, concentrating more on implementing and giving feedback and that level of curriculum development rather than in the creation from the ground up all the time because it puts a lot of pressure on them. So I'd love to talk more with you about it.
Right, and I just think as a board moving forward, just looking at how many days we're expecting and what the pace is, and at the end of the summer, did we make our goals or not? So we don't find out in March that,
Yeah, that makes
you know,
sense.
just a little bit too late, that's all. But anyway, thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
That
And for,
clarified it.
just
Thank you.
again, for my school community, 9 o'clock Wednesday, we'll send out details about where, if anybody wants to come ask any questions, so.
What grade level did this affect again?
All grades, all grade levels.
And what,
Not
Three,
as,
four, five.
it didn't have as big of an impact on third.
On third grade.
Because
what were
they're-
the content subject? I know it's social studies, but what specifically is the content?
Fifth grade, the third unit would have been the American Revolution,
Uh-huh.
and fourth grade would have been looking at current events in U.S. regions. So their study is all about U.S. geography in fourth grade, and also about how our government works, so. yeah.
Thank you very much.
Sure,
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you, guys.
And
I've got 4 kiddos outside.
I
so
see
I'm-
them out
Those-
there,
are
yeah.
those your
Oh,
guys
they've been
running
peeking
around?
in?
Yeah.
So I'm going to wish you guys a good evening.
Thanks, Jen.
Okay, thank you, Jen.
Good luck.
Thanks.
Committee reports, business ops.
Okay, we met this morning and continue to work on the metrics, current operating metrics for the system, and get data in a manageable, diceable, sliceable way that we can understand really what's going on and develop some operating plans against that. We had a great discussion with the Board of Finance member who was there about special ed. It continues, as everyone knows, to rear its head, and I think that we have a game plan. Andrew did just a great job this morning. It was an eye-opening, commentary. And I think plans are afoot to engage the entire Board of Finance on our
Right.
special ed program and to help continue to educate them so they have a clear understanding of what the obstacles are and what we are engaged in that arena. It's really quite, it's challenging to say the least. But no, it was a good meeting. We'll meet again next Thursday, prior to next week's board meeting also.
Good.
Okay.
Do you have anything to add?
Great summary.
Great, thank you. I have no report from policy. Do you have anything for teaching and learning? Okay. Review and discuss the 2018-19 district calendar, which I know is something that, talk about
Well,
online
Let's
social
face it,
media
the most
conversations. I know
Right.
that-
Thing ever.
so we believe
That's
kids should
been a
be in
hot-
school.
Yes.
The question is when, and we agree not at the end of June.
Right.
I think that's been the consensus. So, goes without saying, this has been an unusual year, given the extraordinary number of weather closures. So the feedback that I've received over the last month or so indicates to me that there's a strong appetite to go ahead and even try to revise the 18-19 calendar, which we approved earlier this year. The general interest is to try and end the school year earlier in June and even earlier than where it's slated at this point. So in looking at that, I met with a calendar committee. I've talked to all kinds of different people and gotten all kinds of feedback. And there was an appetite to try to relocate the first day of school to back before the start of Labor Day. So that was kind of my first go at working through this calendar. For a variety of reasons, that just isn't achievable for 18-19. We have, issues in terms of planning school schedules here. Others have pre-planned vacations. One of the significant changes that we made in the currently approved calendar was to relocate 2 professional learning days to prior to the start of school to get them out of the student school year. So those factors really made it virtually impossible to make that change. So then we moved on to some other changes. So what we're proposing in the revised calendar is that we adjust those days around the Columbus Day weekend to hold professional learning on Columbus Day, and then make the 9th just a typical student day. And then the second change that we made was to take a day back. If you recall, this calendar to the currently approved calendar, we were able to add a day to that February recess. We're taking that back. And so,
I'm sorry, can we go back, because I'm looking here at the calendar that's in front of us. It has Columbus Day, the 8th, there's no school, and then professional learning, no
So
students.
this hasn't
that's
been
the
touched.
that's
This
the
is one
original,
we
Glenn.
approved.
Yeah, that's the original.
Then
So the
I don't
revised
have the-
calendar,
I don't have the revised.
it's in your, should be in your
It's not
packet.
the packet, no.
The proposed revised one is not.
No, it's not. the
Oh, I
packet.
had it in mind,
Okay.
so my apologies. So then, let me just,
So we can mark ours up just.
yeah, so just, so it's really, because it's
Okay.
2 simple changes.
Okay.
So October, Columbus Day becomes a professional learning day, that's the 8th. The 9th becomes a regular school day.
Regular school day.
And then in February, we took back one of the days in February to shorten that break.
Which one?
Okay,
So was it Wednesday was the release day? So, so now Thursday is the early release day, so we took Wednesday, the 13th back.
okay, so 13th will be a full day school.
13th would be a regular day of school.
Regular day.
So what that does is give us additional days, so that changes the end date to June 13th, to Thursday, June 13th.
Right,
So,
you gained 2 days.
yeah, so we picked up 2 days. So now, it's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. It's not, I think, what we would all want, given all the different feedback, but I think the common goal is to try to buy a couple more days to mitigate against another winter like this one. So I think that accomplishes that task. As part of this process, I'm required to get some consensus from the WEA, so I sent this calendar, the revised calendar, along with the originally approved calendar, out to them. I just checked before I came in, and I had just around 140 responses so far, and as you might expect, the overwhelming majority want to revise the calendar. So I asked them to finish off the responses by the middle of next week. I will have a motion to approve the revised calendar
Great.
for next week, for the next meeting.
And so contractually, we can do that to Columbus Day?
We can, and so, yeah, I have to remember the whole odyssey around school calendars in this state. So one of the changes that we thought we benefited from a year ago, right, was the elimination of the requirement of the regional calendar.
Right.
Right.
In the regional calendar for this region, Columbus
Is
Day
the-
was a day of school. So, listen.
What's the start day on the regional calendar?
I think it's the Wednesday before Labor Day. So I'm just going to tell you now, now we'll get some input, for
this
the
is an off year.
1920
All right.
calendar. But it's going to look a whole lot like the regional calendar.
Well, we'll have to change something just to be ready.
So I think, the other feedback I've
Gallon
gotten, so here's, I'll just give you the kind of the big picture here. We can't have it all, right?
No.
I think,
And
so
you
we
can't
need to
please
begin there.
everybody, right.
So I'll tell you, with the advent of the construction at Miller Driscoll, and the requirement, the necessity to start school after Labor Day, the last 2 years, the positive feedback was unmistakable.
Tremendous, yeah.
Right? But we knew it was a trade-off. And
Right.
so last year, we went later than some of our surrounding districts. This year is unbelievable.
later, yeah.
So, I think it makes sense to go back and start before
I
Labor Day
agree.
again. So we'll
Yeah.
do that. If we can keep at least the 2 professional learning days that we move to the prior to the start of the school year before the kids return, that gives us a couple of extra days. So that would also give us an opportunity to take another look at February. And I've gotten some feedback. Both there are families in this community that like a longer February break. And then there are families who take a longer February break regardless of what's happening with the school calendar. And that makes life difficult for our teachers.
Right.
And we're already jammed for time when we're talking about implementing, really rich units of instruction. So stand by on 1920. We'll have, some revised calendars
Okay.
in short order in 2021. And like I said before,
So we'll see this next Thursday
For
for approval?
yeah, and that's, pending. I'm assuming the rest of the feedback as it comes in will just reinforce the desire to change.
Okay.
And that's been, even from some of the families, I don't think everyone's going to love the decisions in that calendar, but I don't think anyone's going to argue with the desire to end
No.
earlier, so.
No, who would have guessed?
Yeah, so I think we can live with it for a year.
Okay,
Alrighty?
thank you. The Wilton Public Schools Emergency Operations?
Right, so we had some folks, they were actually originally scheduled to come to our last board meeting that was snowed out. So I want to invite Jory Higgins, Brian Jacobs, and Tom Koch are all members of our emergency operations team. And they've been working in their respective schools and at the district level to really continue to refine and implement our plans. So I asked them, given the events earlier this year, I thought it'd be timely to just have them remind the board of some of the good emergency operations work that's taking place. So gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. And I'll just start by thanking the board for this opportunity and our senior leadership for letting us take this opportunity. It's really just meant to give you a brief, and I mean brief, update on where we are on, there's a couple of synonymous terms, whether it's emergency operations or all hazards, or even at the state level, they call about our building level, it's the School Safety and Security Committee. They're all synonymous with just making sure we have environment that is safe and secure for students and staff. But Dr. Smith had asked we maybe come and give you just a brief update of what's been going on and what's happening, give you an idea of the structures that are in place, but then also give you an opportunity to just know that this is an ever-evolving process that we go through. It's not something that's stagnant at all. We're constantly looking to update and revise it. We have purposefully kept the slides in your handout here and for the public viewing very brief. The board also has another document that Deputy Fire Chief Mark Amatrito had put together in the spring of last year that he's updated just in the last month or so with a couple of bullets that are new. But I think the overall theme for this is just to understand that we have, first of all, a plan in place, and we have trained professionals that are in place to implement the plan. And without providing every detail of the plan, it's striking that balance between the understanding that there's a plan and people in place, and understanding that there's a level of privacy that we need to keep relative to the details of the plan. We're not really prepared in this forum to do a Q&A per se, and happy to entertain board questions if you have any in a more private setting, if that's appropriate another time. So you probably want to know who we are. And I'm Jory Higgins, and I'm a dean at Middlebrook, and I'm really in Maria Coleman's stead right now. She ordinarily would be in this role to lead the district level committee along with Brian.
Yep. Yeah, I'm Brian Jacobs. I'm a history teacher at the high school and also the district IL for school safety and security.
Tom Koch, reading teacher, Middlebrook School webmaster.
And one thing we do want to point out is that we represent obviously a much larger group involving administrators, teachers, members of our law enforcement, first responders in town that have been working together both at the district level and also at the school levels between some of the school committees as well as the district committee. So this is we're representing just a much larger group of professionals who are constantly involved in the process of reviewing, refining, and finding ways to improve the plans that we have in place throughout the district.
So it's small to large, I guess the way to look at it is that we have building and district and even town level groups that are involved in the security and safety of the building. Dr. Smith and I sit on the Wilton Security Task Force team that meets roughly once a month. We all sit on our respective building teams, and we also, all three of us, sit on the district level meeting. So we'll meet at the building level for obviously building specific needs, at a district level, not only in terms of the plans and what's going on for right now, how's it going, updates and that sort of thing, but also in terms of what do we need to look for moving forward. So there's a lot of that work that's I'm trying to look for the opposite of static. It's constantly flowing. It's constantly dynamic. Thank you. So it's important to understand that even when you hear of news that comes up in the media and things that happen in other towns, those are very much a part of what we build into our programs here to learn from other districts, other schools, other towns' experiences, and try to make our plan just that much more solid.
Okay, so the ICS structure, or the incident command structure, is an established team in every one of our school buildings that is ready to be enacted in the unfortunate event of an emergency. It is comprised of members of the internal staff in the building, starting, for example, with the school commander, or that is represented by our school principals. We have other positions in the structure, such as public information officers, liaisons, business, and logistics, to name a few. So one thing to note is that the ICS, once enacted, it will conduct itself throughout the entire event of an emergency, and then continue to work with local and state authorities if necessary until our building is deemed ready to be returned to once again.
And the ICS itself is part of what's known as the National Incident Management System, or NIMS. This is a organizational structure that was put into place in the mid-1970s. Is used throughout the federal government, local, and also local and state levels, and has been employed at within school districts over the past couple of years. What it allows for is what we call a flexible and all-hazard response that can be used for really any situation, whether it's an emergency or even a non-emergency situation that involves coordination, communication, and collaboration between different organizations. Whether it's schools, law enforcement, between schools, between districts, and things like this. It really facilitates the kind of cooperation, the kind of communication that you need between all these groups when responding to any kind of potential situation. Along with this, the district has adopted what's known as the standard response protocol, which is a provides flexible response options for a variety of potential situations. The terms that you commonly hear, like lockdown, lockout, shelter in place, evacuations. Those are the various components of the standard response protocol, which is variations of it are used widespread around the country, and we've employed it within our across all of our schools, so that there is common language, common protocols, common procedures. As students move up from the elementary schools to the middle school to the high school, they're used to the types of to the language, the terminology that's used. If you have faculty members or staff members who work at different schools during the day, or move from one school to another, there's going to be very similar with some variations based on the age levels at each school and the specific needs of each school. Very common terms, very common protocols between each.
Okay, so the last bullet on our list here is one that we hear a lot about in Wilton Public Schools, but sometimes forget that it's a very integral part of our emergency operations planning, and that is our safe school climate. Each building works very closely with our school climate coordinator, Ms. Kimmy Zemo, who I know is in the back over here. We like to think of the school climate as the proactive approach to this emergency protocol, and the social and emotional health of our students and staff is priority number one, and hopefully we never have to go on to a reactive model and enact some of these plans. That is the safe school climate.
This is actually the graphic that we have on here. This is actually from the standard response protocol itself, that kind of outlines some of the various responses that schools have available to them in the event of an emergency. This is actually a flyer that is posted across different areas of each building across the district. Teachers are trained on this on a regular basis. This is a component of the training that teachers get at the beginning of each school year during the opening of school days. We're actually working towards adding additional training times throughout the school year, refresher courses, both for faculty in general, but also members of the ICS, the ICS structures that Tom mentioned earlier. In addition, we also have members of our of our school-based committees and also the district committee who have been involved in even more advanced training. At the high school, we have several people who have completed NOVA training recently, which is NOVA stands for the National Organization for Victims Assistance, which is an advanced crisis response training. And Tom himself has also been involved in some other training initiatives too.
So to name a few that I bring to the table. I was trained in the school security and violent intruder from the Department of Homeland Security. I am also Alice Institute trained with certification, and recently completed my course in the WebLink crew.
I think Brian mentioned it briefly. I just want to highlight again, all of the rooms throughout the district have this form posted. In fact, if you start to walk out of the library here, you'll see to the left of the door is actually that form up on the little side window of the door. And one of the things that we recognized even as recently as about 2-3 years ago was we had several staff members that jumped from building to building. They're working in different buildings, and each building had its own process, whether it was a lockout or a lock-in or a shelter, et cetera. So there was a need to communicate the same language for Andrea comes to visit us at Middlebrook, and it's different in our building than it is in Cider Mill. That's no good. We need to make sure that we have common language. You don't mind me using this as an example, don't you? Okay. All right.
And she does come to our school.
And she does. So it was important to recognize that was something that we wanted to firm up across the district. And this standard response protocol gives us the nice, cute little graphic to realize that we can boil down any kind of an emergency into one of those 4 responses. Okay. I think the next one's yours, Brian.
Yep. And as I mentioned earlier, we have teams at each building, both building level EOPS teams as well as the ICS structures themselves, that meet on a regular basis in order to review any potential concerns, any issues at each building, and also to make sure that they're properly rolling out all the various protocols, trainings that the district has initiated. At the same time, in coordination with, especially at the district level, with our district committee, we have, very close coordination with our colleagues with the Wilton Police Department, Wilton Fire Department. They are members of this, members of that team that, attend regularly. We've had, quite a few, especially recently, quite a few, extra sessions with them to plan out, various, tabletop simulations that we've run to test out, different aspects of our response protocols. Jory mentioned, Deputy Chief Amatrudo, Captain Rob Cipolla has also been, integral in this, as well as our SROs within the district, Officers Diane McLean and Rich Ross. Very much, they've been very helpful in terms of collaborating to, help make sure that our plans are in place, that we're, practicing them, testing them out, as well as we can, and getting the trainings that our, faculty need in order to help, respond in the event of an emergency. At the district level, some of our main tasks each year are really focused on not just continually reviewing, the best practices that are out there in terms of emergency response and seeing where we can, find ways to improve, responses with our own schools, but also making sure that we're in compliance with, the regulations set by the state of Connecticut and Homeland Security. Every November, we resubmit our, the entire district plan, which usually ends up being a fairly decent-sized document once everything is said and done, that outlines all the details at the district level and also at the school level, to inform the state as far as what our protocols are in place, and make sure, let them know that, be aware that, we're in total compliance with all these new regulations coming down from the government. As I said, those are submitted to the Connecticut Department of Homeland Security every November.
So one of the ways that we fulfill our requirements and compliance, especially with the students, is through our annual drills. And all buildings reach the required 10, which include our fire, our lockdown, our shelter-in-place drills, and our extended drills at all the buildings.
So the last slide is somewhat purposeful, not only in the Aristotle comment, but also the picture of the school. And it's just the fact that it's always on our minds that these are our schools, these are our children, these are our students. It's not a penitentiary. It's not a locked gate community sort of thing, that we recognize that it's filled with kids and trusted professionals. And we have to strike that balance between having a plan and having people safe and them feeling like they're safe. And there's a difference, if you know what I'm talking about. That it's one thing to have a plan and we may know that they're safe, but it's also a whole other layer of that for children and adults to feel like they can go to school and feel like they are in a safe environment. And so if you hear nothing else, one of the things that we wanted to be clear about tonight was understanding that there are trained professionals that we work with, and we have varying levels of training ourselves as individuals, that we translate that out to the community of the school to make sure that we have those pockets of individuals in our building to build our own team of teams, if you will, within the building, to make sure that people are safe and that they also feel safe.
Well, one of the things that we would like to leave the board knowing is that perhaps one of the most significant pieces of our ongoing work on a weekly and sometimes daily basis is our engagement with the children. And it really begins there. We pride ourselves across the buildings trying to ensure that every single student has at least one adult that they can go to and trust. And for example, recently, in light of the unfortunate tragedy in Parkland, Jory and I have had multiple students reach out to us and correspond with us through writing with concerns and some ideas that they wanted to bring to the table. And that type of discourse really changes the culture positively in our buildings, as opposed to having the children walking around internalizing some of these fears and worries, and letting, almost like on social media, right, those conversations translate negatively in lunchrooms and in gym classes. They're coming to us. We've scheduled multiple meetings already, and we have many more on the calendar. But rest assured that the students are leaving not only feeling empowered, but feeling like they have the ability to change the culture of the school. And we feel strongly that that's where it begins, and that's our daily work. So that that's what we call our story of the emergency operations. It's with the children, for sure.
So thank you. That's all we have for you specifically.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can we ask one question at all, or?
Sure.
One.
Well, no, I have two.
Have you met him yet?
Well, wait, the Yankees are over. You could
Be
open
a
it up.
really
The
long
first,
question.
is there anything that you think that we should be doing, or that you want to do that you think is important, that you're being constrained by financially? In other words, do you have all the financial resources that you feel you need to do the work that you obviously are doing apparently quite well? Or is there anything you think we should be doing that, well, we just don't have the money for it, because that's inexcusable? So I would ask you to come to us at any point in time when you feel the need that there's something critical, something vital that you think we should be doing that we're not doing for financial reasons. Because there's no room with that.
I know that Dr. Smith has had some conversations with the board about some thoughts along those lines with the assessment we did with the cameras.
But we need to be
I think
engaged
you
in
had
that.
pointed out, that's more of a reactive piece that you would put in place, a camera, than a proactive part, and upgrading things like PA systems and that sort of thing. I think a big part of it is the communication. To my thinking, there is a change in culture that we need to get used to. And whether it's a feeling of a loss of a certain level of civil liberties, or however you want to look at it. I think of Heather Priest's classroom, for example, if you all know where it is at the end of our campus at Middlebrook. It would be very easy for an adult to come to that back door, and it's pouring rain, to bang on the door and say, hey, let me in. And the nice thing to do would be to open the door and let this person in. Oh, I know, that's Glenn Hemmerly. I know him, you can let him in, right? Or, gee, that's so-and-so's mom. But really, in order to keep everyone safe and to follow a protocol that we would all establish and follow would be, I'm sorry I can't let you in, but you're gonna have to walk around. And they can walk under pretty much cover around the building to the front and follow that process. Every time anybody in the community sees a door propped open by a rock, for all of us to take exception to that and make sure that we're not doing that. We're not allowing that. We're making sure that outside agencies who use our facilities, it's amazing how frequently Middlebrook and the high school is used in the 3:30 to 9:30 time slot every day. And it's really unnerving to see the number of times that doors are propped open by the agencies that are using the facility. So I think it's a need to make sure that we are communicating that quite frequently, either as a board or even at an individual building level, to make sure that we're all of the same mindset with that. And I think the other thing is to look for opportunities where we offer the possibility for staff to get training if they're interested in it. Emergency first responder, for example, training. And that's something that Dr. Smith and I have been working on about getting off the ground floor here, and folks that are very interested in getting that training.
I just don't want you to feel constrained, or feel that if there's something you guys need to do or you think we should be doing, we'll find a way to do it, okay? Just get to us and let us know what's important, because there's no reason not to,
Thank you.
okay?
Thank you.
And I just wanted to add that I want to thank you for the presentation tonight. I think it's very reassuring. You know, the structures, the foundation, the professionalism, the level of training. I think the community and the parents and the kids and the staff can all feel reassured. My question is that after each horrific tragedy, sometimes there are lessons learned. And how is that communicated? In other words, with every different situation, sometimes there's another layer of, oh yes, we need to pay attention to something else, or we need to change our thinking about whatever it may be. Is that communicated through the police department, through the state? How does that work?
Well,
So we can keep up with best practices is really my question.
We talked a little bit about the membership on the district level, and Captain Cipolla and the two SROs, as well as Deputy Chief Amatrudo, are very much in touch with the latest and greatest and what can be learned from, et cetera, that they will share at that level, which we bring back to the buildings about, what are some measures we need to put in place or do differently. Anybody that's come to the schools and realized that there's a different visitor management system in place that's now 2 years old, I want to say it's at least 2 years old, came from those sorts of things. That was more of a, I don't want to say response to Sandy Hook, but it was the part of that follow-up. We won't hear specifics
Yeah, it will
about
take a
Parkland
while.
for a while. It's gonna
Right.
take a little
Right.
while for what's the learning curve there.
Okay.
Because I have some questions about, the idea if he was wandering for a while afterward, and how did they know, and all that. So those sorts of things that we all want to know too, but
Yeah.
Right,
Captain
and
Cipolla is very
yeah,
much
okay.
in tune with that and is aware that that's something we all want to know.
Yeah,
And even informally, as we're, through connections both within, within the building, where there's, people that, I work with at the high school, we're constantly sharing information back and forth as, news stories pop up about, much smaller scale, incidents like the incident at Staples, a couple months ago. As we get information about that, we'll share it around so that, that information can get through to different committees. And even, contacts across, across districts, that's, sharing information in terms of, what system are they using for reunification? How is this piece of technology working? What have you guys learned that worked well or didn't work well when you try to bring in a drill here, and sort of sharing information back and forth between between district contexts like that too. So there's definitely that sort of an informal structure that's kind of sort of grown organically, in that regard as well.
And Debbie, to provide an answer from my perspective as well, I'm going to go back to the students because I think we learn a lot from them. I know Dr. Smith had a report that I had given to him after one of my trainings, so I apologize. I don't have it here with me with statistics. I didn't think we were doing that. But I could tell you that since 1974, K-12 acts of violence in schools that they've had to deal with, the number, it's well over 80% of all of them, and it was confirmed that students were well aware of what was going to happen. I believe it was something along the lines of 88%. The students are my number one resource. And so what do we learn from in all of these situations and real tragic events is it's our number one goal, to engage in real conversations with them, not to run from us, not to see us as people that they can't communicate with. Bring them to the table. Jory and I just had a conversation with a young lady. I won't disclose what her idea was. It was a damn good one. I'll tell you that right now, and it was something that we didn't think of. And it's pretty incredible what they can provide us, along with all of the other sources. They're in the building every day. They see it, they hear it, they know it, and I want to be a part of it.
We have a relationship with Dr. David Bernstein, and we've had several interactions for different reasons with him, and he has a term that makes a lot of sense relative to your question, and that is that there's leakage. That idea that somebody knows something and somebody knew something, and one of the conversations that came up in one of our kid talks that we had even this week was changing that culture with kids of this closed mouth, I can't rat someone out, I can't tell, versus whether or not I can say that, oh, I saw someone post something online, or they said something or did something that was somewhat scary. And we talked a lot about what's your peace of mind worth, what's your life worth, and you put it in those kind of terms, pretty easy to have an answer to that. But I think it really is going to require a lot of work to change that level of the culture, to recognize it's not about tattletaling, and it's really more about making sure that not only we're all safe, but that person who's expressing some level of concern is also safe. And Kim Simo is a rock star relative to that, in terms of really being on top of taking care of everyone involved and making sure that we're looking at all aspects of that. So I feel confident in the folks that are working on this and doing that, but it's going to be an constant and ongoing sort of thing that we're going to have to always stay on top of, and not get complacent.
Right,
Ever.
that's the important piece.
Familiar with the Sandy Hook Promise organization? And they have a Say Something
Yes.
training program, so, okay.
Yes.
I don't know if we use that or not, or we've learned from it, or,
We have folks that are involved in it, actually.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you very much.
District climate.
Good, so we want to invite Kim Zemo and Genevieve Aison to come forward. As you know, Sonia Luthar was here in the district presenting a few weeks ago. She didn't have an opportunity to come and address the board, so we asked Kim and Genevieve, welcome, to just provide a summary and provide some thinking on next steps moving forward.
Thanks for having us. I just want to thank Tom for kind of laying the groundwork for why we even engaged in this work. And it really is a proactive measure to really ensure that we are looking at our students' health and wellness. So just to give you a little history, Dr. Luther came and presented in the fall of 2016. The program was The Price of Privilege at that time. Over 300 parents came out, definitely hit a nerve, and she really talked about the link between privilege and substance abuse. And at that point, the parent community really wanted data on our own students, and the schools agreed, and we were so lucky to have the support of the Youth Council, and Genevieve is going to speak tonight too on the collaboration, but this whole project was funded through a grant that they received, otherwise we wouldn't have been able to engage. So we looked at surveying our students in the fall with a goal of mind to determine the most promising directions for future interventions that'll maximize the youth well-being in our community. So in November, we, through our advisory, administered the survey. It was quite intense and quite long, but we got over 1,200 students to participate, not 1,200 finished, a little under 1,000, but over 1,200, and they were able to use some of the data for some of the students that didn't finish. So we had an 80 to 85% participation rate, which was really good. Dr. Luther uses instruments and measures that are scientifically rigorous, and they're used by scientists in peer-reviewed research. The data collection, what's measured is 3 different categories: looking at students' levels of well-being, modifiable aspects around school climate, so we got more data around school climate, and then modifiable aspects of the parent-child relationship. So she then came back and presented on March 5th to the community as well as administration and the teaching community at the high school. And she's able to speak from the point of view not only as a researcher but as a mother, so I think she's very relatable. And one of her quotes that I think is important is that we're working towards not solutions, but really getting a good direction for how we can make a difference, and using research-based interventions and information rather than just our best impressions. So her presentation addressed 3 areas. The first is, where do Wilton students fall on average related to other high-achieving schools, not just on the aspects of personal adjustment, but also on risk and protective factors that affects their well-being. The second was, when looking at the risk and protective factors, what's especially important for us to focus on? Which I think is a really helpful piece, that we don't have all this information, but there are specific areas that we really need to look at. And then based on the findings, what are the future directions that should be pursued? So in looking at student outcomes, in high-achieving schools with good standardized tests, this is one of her quotes as well, high SATs, lots of extracurricular, in every single school they see the same thing. There are elevations in one or more significant areas of adjustments. So it's not unique to Wilton, some of the information that we're going to present. What is unique is the area of adjustment that's been identified. So the first measurement that we're going to talk about, she uses the Monitoring the Future study, which is national. It's well-normed and by students by age and year of assessment. So our rates of substance abuse in Wilton are elevated to the national norms, but are similar to high-achieving schools. So I think that's good news, but we still have elevated rates, which is certainly a concern. So the good news is that in Wilton, most students did not report smoking cigarettes in the last year. So we've tackled that well. Around 50% of our students reported using alcohol in the last year. 35% reported having been drunk, and 25% reported using marijuana. Of really concern, and this is not a surprise, is the e-cigarettes and juuling. Our rates were elevated compared to the norms. So nearly 25% of 9th and 10th graders reported juuling and 45% of 11th and 12th graders. So this is really an area that we need to educate our kids that it's not harmless, that they're marketing towards children.
Does everybody know what juuling is? Because that is a
Just learned
new
that
term.
recently.
Yeah.
So the juuling is, it looks like it's an electronic device that you can smoke vapor. I don't even know
It's
if
an
smoking.
e-cigarette.
It's an
Yes.
e-cigarette.
E-cigarette.
Looks like a
Very
thumb
small.
drive.
Right.
And it plugs into your laptop, looking like a thumb drive, to recharge. So you'll hear in the parent community, they're doing it right under the teachers' noses because it looks just like a thumb drive. And so really working to educate our staff to be aware of what to look for. And it's a concern in all the area schools. The next instrument is the Youth Self-Report, which again is published in copyrighted measure with excellent national norms. It looks at internalizing and externalizing symptoms. The internalizing symptoms is anxious, depressed, also somatic symptoms like unexplained headaches or stomach aches. The externalizing symptoms are outward, so rule breaking, aggressive behaviors, etc. And the measure gives not just average levels, but allows the researcher to measure the level at which the symptoms becomes clinically significant. So I think that's important. This information is certainly concerning, not surprising, because we're seeing it in our mental health staff in terms of the students and the volume that they're seeing. About 30% of Wilton students have above average levels of internalizing symptoms, and this is clinically significant, compared to the national norm of 7%. Almost 20% have much above average levels compared to the national norm of 2%. So this is the most pronounced problem in Wilton, is the anxious depressed scale. The next was the withdrawn depressed and somatic symptoms, but these were elevated, but to a much lesser extent than the anxious depressed. And again, Dr. Luther wanted to highlight that we're not unique, that some kind of symptoms will be elevated everywhere. The question is which kind, how much, and what we can do about it. So not to alarm that we're unique, that we've had these elevated levels, not just national norms, but also schools like us, that one area or more would be elevated. Positive attributes these include empathy, pro-social reputations, and intrinsic life goals. The students' responses on this were similar to other high-achieving schools. And then I think it's up to you for
Okay.
the
All right,
next
so-
portion.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about which factors influence children's adjustment outcomes. So I'll start with that. And the first area that she tackled was relationships with parents. So how do relationships with parents impact these outcomes that we saw? So, of course, we all know that parents are among the most important influence on their children's development. And with regard to both the internalizing symptoms of anxiety, depression, somatic symptoms, and the externalizing symptoms of rule breaking or aggression, having a strong connection to parents is a protective factor for kids. So Dr. Luther looked at our kids to see are there associations between parent attachment and outcomes. And for Wilton students, when attachment to parents is high, symptoms are low. And interestingly, the strength of association with outcomes is even higher when children don't feel attached to parents. So when children feel alienated from parents, then their symptoms are high. And this is one of the situations where bad is stronger than good. So feeling disconnected from parents has a stronger impact than feeling connected does. And then also with regard to substance use, she looked at how children perceive their parents' anticipated repercussions. So in communities like ours, perceived laxness. So in other words, the idea that kids say, well, regardless of whether my mom and dad have rules around substance use, the repercussions won't really be very severe. That's a problem in communities like ours. Children often believe that even though there's rules, not much will happen if they do use substances. And our kids, like other kids in communities like ours, actually are quite affected by that. And so this is important. Parents really need to understand that anticipated repercussions do matter. And when we look at the data, kids who perceive that there will be repercussions for substance use are less likely to use. If they perceive that there will be repercussions for rule breaking, they're less likely to do that. So parents need to understand that there is a strong connection there. And this has really long-term consequences, especially with regard to substance use, because Dr. Luther has also done longitudinal research that's found that this concept of parent containment is not only important while students are in high school, but it has implications down the road. So she's looked at kids at the age of 28 in other communities, and rates of addiction are twice as high for graduates of high-achieving schools as they are for national norms, and that's affected by this concept of perceived repercussions in high school.
Wait, can you say that again? Rates of addiction?
Rates of addiction
twice
at
as
age
high.
28 are twice as high for graduates of high-achieving schools as they are for national norms.
But that's mitigated if there's a
So-
sense of repercussions, even as an adult?
If there's a sense of repercussions in high school,
Yeah.
it has a long-term impact in reducing rates of addiction
Okay, thank you.
later.
Mhm.
Does that
So it's
make
important, so
sense?
parents need to have
So you
good,
could-
strong, clear rules.
Right.
And this matters beyond, after they leave the house.
And not only do you need to have rules, your kids need to believe that you will act on them.
Do you have a statistic on how many kids feel that there will be no repercussions
I
for
don't have
substance
that.
abuse?
I don't have that. Because she, rather than giving us this percentage of kids believes this or that, and I can ask, what she gave us is an association between when kids believe it, what is the outcome. So that's how she linked the data for us, is associations between these domains and outcomes, rather than this percentage of kids believe this or that. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
And then I'm also going to talk a little bit about relationships with peers. And with similarly to relationships with parents, bad is stronger than good. So links with adjustment problems are stronger for peer victimization, bullying, and sexual harassment than they are than links with positive outcomes are for support. So that's something for us to be aware of. Also, social media comparisons are concerning. So just like adults do, students compare themselves to others on social media. And kids who tend to feel that everyone else's life is better than theirs are more prone to depression and anxiety. And this association is especially strong for girls. So,
Can I add an anecdote to that? So she came and spoke with a student group before she presented, and she wanted to just hear, I shouldn't say she spoke, she wanted to get some information from them. And the students were able to identify how it's not necessarily the pressure, the competition from home, but that they compete with one another. So I'll get a test grade, and I got a 91, and Sarah sitting next to me got a 94, and now she feels bad about herself for that, and that they have trouble even toning the volume down on that, so.
right. And I'm actually going to circle back to that in a little bit because that's an important piece. No, I'm glad you brought it up.
Okay.
So, with regard to girls and comparisons to others, these days, she talked about this, in our society today, girls have extremely high expectations. They're supposed to excel now at everything. They're supposed to be great athletes and artists and great in the classroom, and they're supposed to be pretty, and they're supposed to be nice. And so we are starting to see problems with perfectionism in girls, and this is something that she cautioned parents to really be aware of, is perfectionism with girls. Not to say that this isn't an issue for boys as well, it just is more of an issue for girls. And then I'm going to hand it back to Kim to talk about school climate.
So another domain is school climate, and she examined about a dozen major dimensions of school climate to identify what portions of the kids feel positively and what portion feel negatively. And the question here is, when considering all 12 aspects, is which ones have the most unique significance and therefore should be prioritized? And she was able to, based on the association with symptoms, the greatest concern in Wilton is the intolerance of bullying, alienation from teachers, students' belief that there's an adult in the school who cares about them. 51% of girls felt there was an adult, and 60% of boys had positive responses. And then parent community involvement. she emphasized, and I think it's important, that this isn't it's to not engage in teacher bashing around some of these areas, but that the purpose is really to cast aspersions, but to report that, to not cast, but to report that kids are saying, look at what they're saying to determine where there's room for improvement, but not to really point fingers. And, one area that we continue to work on, and you heard Tom talk about it, I think, because it's a focus at the middle school as well as the high school, is how do we ensure that students are connected to at least one adult? And we have work to do. Continued in that area. So the parent community involvement, Wilton students perceive that collaboration is low between the school and parents. And these students are the one that had most troubling scores or
Right, so
reported.
it's not that lots of kids said that the
It's the
collaboration is
connection.
low. It's that the kids who did say collaboration was low are the ones who are struggling.
These kids are the ones who are feeling most pressured and unhappy.
Right.
And that's an important area of intervention for us to look at.
All right, so what are you supposed to take away? Because we just blew through an hour of her presentation in a very short time. It's a little overwhelming. At least I felt overwhelmed when I went through it the first time. So, or where are we supposed to go from here? So one of the things she emphasized is that interventions have to be collaborative. We have to focus on parents, the schools, and peer groups. There's work to do in each of these areas. And then a common theme emerged in all of them. And I believe that this is the root problem, this common theme that underlies everything else, and that is excessive focus on achievement. So we all want our children to be successful, right? That's everybody's goal. But we now know that 30% of our kids are really struggling. And those kids are at risk, because when you're anxious and depressed, that compromises your chances of being successful. So if our goal is to have our kids be successful, we really need to address that. And I think that means we need to shift our focus from achievement to resilience. So Dr. Luther studies resilience. That's what she studied for 30 years. And she said, she told us that night, she said 80 years of research on resilience comes up with this one take-home message. Resilience rests fundamentally on relationships. It's about feeling seen and loved for who we are at our core. And I remember actually, Dr. Smith, being at the library a couple of years ago, and you said, we're human beings, not human doings, right? And, so anyway, sorry, that was a tangent. But this idea that we need to feel seen and loved for who we are at our core, this is true for children and it's true for adults. And so it's true for all of us in our community. And Dr. Luther said it well during the presentation. She said, let us aim high. Let us even aim very high. But there's a point at which we all come together and say, stop. And I think we're at that point. So how do we strengthen relationships and cultivate resilience? Dr. Luther highlighted 5 important messages for parents that I actually think are broadly applicable. She said we have to foster good, open communication. This is one of the ways that we foster strong attachment with our children. We have to avoid what may be seen as criticism, because she says in any relationship, associations are stronger for negative things by as much as a factor of 3 than for positive ones. Harshness always hurts more than kindness helps, so we want to avoid harshness. We need to be vigilant for distress among youth, and we have to remember that kids can be really good at hiding their distress. So it's easy to look at kids who appear to be very, very successful and make an assumption about how they're doing, but we need to go beyond the assumptions. We need to strive for appropriate, consistent limit setting, because anticipated repercussions for substance use, rudeness, bullying, rule breaking, and cheating are linked with low substance use and high prosocial behaviors. We need to be good role models in person and online. Values of kindness, decency, and integrity are particularly important in hyper-competitive subcultures. And we need to prioritize the well-being of adults, and that's true for parents, for teachers, and for staff. Because if we're running on empty, we can't be good caregivers for others. So Wilton Youth Council is going to be working on developing parent education programs in these areas. And we are also happy to continue to collaborate with the schools to support your efforts here.
And the key takeaways for the school is really that pressure is impacting, has impact on the anxious and depressed scale. And the pressure is coming from all areas, from school, from home, self-induced from kids to compete. That we need to look at research-based interventions for bystander to bullying training, and consider ways for the parent and school to work together in respectful ways to really understand what the kids are feeling. And what that tension area is really about. So it's going to take time for us to develop a comprehensive approach, but I believe that if we can continue to collaborate, we're so lucky to have the support of the Youth Council and all the volunteers that are just amazing in the work that they do. I feel very lucky. I really appreciate you being here tonight. This was a big undertaking, but I think the information is really, really useful in helping to support our students and making sure that everybody feels safe and healthy and well and connected. So, any questions?
Thank you. Wow. Where do you start?
Where do you start?
Where do you start? We're in a high-achieving school district where people place a premium on where you go to college. And where does that change? I mean, we went through it with our kids,
We have been through it.
right?
Yes, we've been through it.
And it was very much a high-pressure cooker then than it is now. So what does Dr. Luther say? Where does it, are there things that we should be doing that we're not doing?
I think there's areas for us to focus on. I don't think there's, groundbreaking new information in here. I think we have put things in place, and we need to continue to work at, our school climate effort, and needs to maybe be redirected a bit in terms of targeting some of these areas. I think we need some time to digest and really look at that. She did put us in touch with a colleague who is a school health and wellness consultant, and he's offered to work with the district. He works primarily with independent schools, and is just completing a project with a school in New York. I was actually on the phone with him today, and he shared some of the strategic planning that he did with the school and working on specific things to think about. So he's given us some stuff to kind of digest and look at.
Do we have a sense, the kids who are feeling anxious, is it because they're putting the pressure on themselves, or is the pressure coming from their parents?
I think all of the above.
It's all of the, they identify it from all angles, it seems, so. They talk about it coming, like we said, from each other. I think it's in the.
And it's too bad there's not a way to get the message out beyond, because, it's the parents who understand the problem, who don't show up to
Right.
listen to the presentations.
Well-
It's just, for whatever reason, parents are working, they're busy, they don't have time to go. I just wish there was a way to get the message out more broadly.
I think we're making progress on that, to be honest with you.
Good.
We had probably 350 people in the room for this presentation, which is a lot. We had 300 people the last time she came. We're finding more and more people are coming
Good.
and seeking out information. I think with regard to this idea that, kids are putting pressure on each other, that's a symptom that it's sort of just in the cultural milieu here, and we're not unique in that. That's what she said that over and over again. This is a common problem. That's why she can do this kind of research in lots of schools like ours, or communities like ours. So I think it does involve a bit of a culture shift, and that starts with education. And I feel like we have reached a turning point, that people have been interested in having Dr. Luther come to town twice in 2 school years.
Sure.
And so we are looking at ways of educating parents around these issues, and also I think we have to acknowledge that this pressure that people feel is not based in vanity or anything ugly like that. It's based in fear. It's that we're all we all want our kids to be able to get out in the world and do well, and we're worried that they won't. And so it's helping people to understand what's helpful and what's not helpful, what's a risk and what's not a risk. It's helping to sort of redirect that fear. So it's easy to be afraid of that your kid won't get into a great college. because that's so in your face. If you feel like there's a certain kind of college and you see someone, you're seeing that kids aren't getting into the kind of college that you perceive as the right one, it's harder to see clearly the risks of putting your intention on that topic. So once people understand better that their kids will be successful if they can let go of some of that fear, I think we'll make progress. And I think we're moving in that direction because we're building some momentum around this. Does that make sense?
No,
It's not a simple, it's unfortunately, it's not like we're gonna have a presentation next week and then we'll be all set.
Will this be a benchmark? Like, will she be back?
We can discuss that. I mean, she's certainly
She's probably
offered,
not-
and
probably
shared
not
some, another school that she worked with that she, I think in her presentation, she shared some of the data that, she came back a year and things were looking a little better. And Genevieve and I have been talking a bit, and I just keep thinking about, I think we have to step back before we can move forward. And we really need to kind of reflect on where we're at and how do we dial down the pressure in really thoughtful and sustainable ways. So just looking home, school, community on all fronts, so.
Kim, I think it's not only stepping back and seeing where we are, but maybe redefining where we're going.
Yeah.
I think our goal has to be wellness, right?
Yes.
That should be our number one priority with our kids. Achievement is important, but the outcomes are not going to be good if we don't emphasize wellness.
Correct.
They'll achieve if they're well.
Yes.
Right? Everybody wants to achieve. That's kind of an ingrained thing. Everybody wants to have a happy life, right? So if you're well enough to go after that, you will. So I totally agree with you. It's easy in a moment like this to, we all walk away with our own top priority, and I've spent the last 3 weeks coming up with all sorts of program ideas in my head, and then I've spent the last 3 days talking to Kim and saying, I've come up with a patchwork quilt. We need to all get pointed in the same direction and then bring the community, the families, the schools, all in that same direction. And that takes some time and effort.
Yes.
Well, I want to thank you for your presentation and that I heard her present to the faculty, and I didn't, it was fast and complicated, so this is a great sort of refresher, and more than that, it's sort of a good explanation. One thing that you alluded to quickly is, and that I remember from her presentation, was parents and the school being on the same page. She didn't go into that in a whole lot of depth, but that is something that we could, sort of impact, is to what extent are the parents and the schools on the same page with the same messages and not at odds with each other.
Right.
And again, I don't think it's widespread, but to the extent that it happens, we have to remember that has an impact. And
Yes.
I think she implied it was a negative impact
is.
on the kids.
Yeah, significantly.
So I think we need to tease that out a little bit, and I'm not sure I understand exactly all the ins and outs of it, but there's an area that we
need to
might
look at.
sort of, that
Right.
was kind of interesting and fascinating to me, and maybe something we have some control over.
I agree.
Genevieve,
Yes.
on your website, her presentation still the summary on your
The
website?
summary is still there.
So I think I would
Summary is great.
encourage
Thank you.
Yeah.
anyone who wasn't able to be there that night and listen to it, apparently, because we had 350, well, there are 6,000 homes in Wilton, okay? So to go to your website and read her presentation that's on your website, because it really is, it just spells it out. And I have to say, I wasn't surprised at all with the findings. I don't think any of us really were. If you had asked us, we would probably have been pretty much on the money about what to expect and what the findings were going to say.
I think to have the data though now.
Now
it's
we've
like-
got, yes,
Right.
it's gone beyond just a feeling.
Exactly.
It's now fact, okay? The thing that disturbs me is the connectedness to teachers. Those numbers, I mean, because this has been a hot button of mine now for the 4 years I've been on this board. To only have 50% and 60% say they feel connected to a teacher in the high school is just, I don't know what to do. I find that the most frustrating of all, because I just read the letter that the student wrote about my teacher.
Yes.
I mean, if every teacher in the high school couldn't stand up and say, that was me, okay, they should be able to do that.
I
And
had an
obviously-
interesting conversation
Obviously, they're
today.
not. And so I find that it's just very disturbing.
I sent that letter to staff with the tagline of, they're probably so annoyed with me, but that's okay. A perfect example of connection and how it's so important that we are teaching children, not content, not curriculum. And so I had somebody stop by today, actually, and is like, I read that, and I really gave it some thought. And, you know, when I was hired, as a content specialist, and that's my box that I'm in, and I think we have to keep hitting the importance, and I think this data really, teachers really heard that, and we have to work
hope so.
harder at that.
Yeah, I hope so, because that really, it's just that one little connection can make all the difference in the world.
Right.
Absolutely.
And can I add something to that? Which is, I think that honestly, the pressure around achievement plays in here too. Because teachers feel that, they feel that pressure around achievement. And we all know from personal experience that when we're under pressure, we don't do a good job of maintaining our relationships.
Yeah.
So we have to get a handle on the pressure.
I just, was your survey, was that just high school or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Going back 6, 7 years ago now, there was a joint task force in town that was members of the school community, Wilton Youth Council, Positive Directions company and they put together a survey and did a substance survey. So it would be interesting if you could get your hands on the results of that survey. If you can't, I can help you with that because I administered that survey because I worked for Positive Directions at the time. So at least for the substance abuse of it, that
To do the comparison.
yeah,
Yeah.
it would be interesting to see what 6 years ago what the results were compared to this survey.
And that STEM survey was done, I think, 2 years ago, or 2 or 3, because I was not involved with Wilton Youth Council at that time, but it has been done since I have
Oh,
have
okay.
been involved.
That was
So-
probably the last time.
It was
There's
the
no
last
funding now.
one, because we lost the funding.
Yeah.
Oh, there was one about 2 years ago?
There's more than that.
Three years?
Okay.
It's longer than that, yeah.
Maybe.
All right.
yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your hard work, too. Great stuff.
Thank you for allowing us to collaborate.
Whenever somebody says thanks for
Yeah,
having
and
us, I
of
was like,
course,
thanks
you
for
know, if
doing
there's
that.
anything that you think the board can help with, please don't hesitate to come back and.
I'll make you sorry you said that.
We have a meeting next Tuesday.
Whatever we can do.
So it's just a brilliant segue, because the next item on the agenda is a review of a new policy on the prohibition of hate-based conduct, and on the note of promoting
Which can help us-
connectedness and relationships,
help us,
absolutely. So, you know, from a policy perspective as a symbol, I think this is a really important policy. So I'm proud that this board has come forward with this policy proposal. And when we first began talking about it, in my own limited searching, it struck me that this is not a policy that many boards of education
Right.
seem to have. This is fairly unique, and that was confirmed, through the assistance we got. So we're considering a new policy tonight, and I think it, among other things, it dovetails beautifully with some of our current policies, those around bullying, prevention and intervention, hazing, suspension, expulsion, social networking, employee conduct, non-discrimination, sexual harassment, and civility, to name a few. I want to just read to you, you have it, but the first paragraph that really expresses the policy goal, I think, captures some of the sentiment that we were just talking about, this need to reinforce this idea of community, and then to have very clear policies and procedures that promote that community, and then responses when that those procedures are violated. So respecting diversity and fostering inclusion are core goals of the Wilton Board of Education as we help students become civically engaged and sensitive members of our increasingly global society. The Wilton Board of Education is committed to creating and maintaining an educational environment that embraces diversity and inclusion, and believes our community is strengthened by the richness of each other's diverse characteristics, identities, statuses, backgrounds, beliefs, traditions, and opinions. And the rest of the policy statement goes on to define what hate-based conduct is, and the prohibition around each of those pieces. But I think just on that first point, as we're working with students in staff and clearly an environment that provides a lot of pressure to perform. I think Genevieve's point's really important to come back around to, and that's to make sure that not only do we try to find ways to mitigate the pressure, but to promote those ways that we build relationships. And I think this policy symbolically brings us forward in that direction. So I don't want to take too much time to read through it. You have it, you've seen it.
Can I do have one.
Yeah,
question
go
about
ahead,
it or
Deb.
one comment?
Yep.
You know, like you, I think, at first I thought this is redundant, because we have, you know, the bullying one and all of that. But I do think that it's a good step that we decide to have a policy about this. In the second to last paragraph, it says, students who engage in hate-based conduct shall be subject to school discipline up to and including expulsion, et cetera. I'm just wondering, and maybe this is going a little bit too far, but I'm wondering if we can add, because we are an educational institution, that we say something about an educational intervention or counseling or family conference or something that gets at the,
It's a good idea.
you know, the
Yeah,
cause,
it's
maybe not the
yeah.
cause, but at least while the students are young enough, have a chance to put it in perspective and figure
Yeah.
out some sort of appropriate intervention.
It's a great point, and, you know, we have some emerging practices around restorative justice in the district. We've sent people out over the last couple of years, and we haven't crafted any policy responses yet, but I think in line with what you're thinking, that's really a restorative practice. So how do we, as a district, support kids in making amends, right, even beyond, not only making amends, but, you know, educating them appropriately.
Right, educationally,
Yeah.
and it may be a sign of other things worse down the road. I mean, there's all
Right.
sorts of layers to look at it, lenses to look at it through. I'm just suggesting that we add that.
Yeah, so why don't we take this back to the policy committee and play with some language, and then come back? Because I think we can do that pretty quickly.
Yeah,
Well,
thank you,
I would
Debbie.
just suggest that it not just be language. I mean, I wouldn't put something in unless you're ready to commit to the
Well,
fact
no,
that
it's a policy, so we will,
that it'll
yes,
actually happen.
by
Right,
virtue of
okay.
inclusion, it'll have to happen.
Okay.
Right.
Very
I
good.
think we might need some time, you know, thinking on the regulatory front, how that really manifests
Right.
itself, but I think conceptually,
Right.
Yeah,
that's something we
gotcha.
can
No, I'm
commit
not
to.
trying to bog us down in procedures or protocols or anything like that, but just get that concept in there, that there is the educational, supportive, counseling, something or other intervention piece.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a good point.
Anyone else? Okay.
Okay, so the next policy that's up for
Field trip.
review and discuss, we've been living with the field trip policy for some time. So this is a revised policy, and we've done a number of things. First, we truncated the policy language just to clarify the purpose of field trips. And in our old policies, field trips and I think overseas experiences were expressed in a completely different policy. And as we were looking at those as part of our review, it made sense to bring them together. So we did that. We also expanded the regulation language to define and differentiate day and night, as well as out-of-country field trips. We revised the procedure for field trip planning and approval. So one of the significant changes we made is that international trips now, upon approval, need to come before first the Teaching and Learning Committee. And as you can see in the regulation, there's lots of red. There are lots of steps. And that's really to ensure a high standard of vetting these trips, to ensure that kids are safe, that all of the I's have been dotted and T's have been crossed. There was also, you may recall, at the end of last year, somewhere, I don't remember the specifics exactly, but the district was sued because they'd sent kids off overseas to China, and kids got a bug-borne illness or something. And so there was some just new provisions that as trips are being proposed, if any of those kinds of potentials are there in the proposed trip location, the school and the school administration needs to do its diligence in making sure that information is known by prospective attendees. So we added a student conduct agreement, and there is a fairly lengthy permission slip. Is there anything else I want to say on that?
No,
Anything you want to say?
no, just, I think you said it all, just,
It's pretty comprehensive. I think it's
Yeah.
a good-
It is.
It's pretty good.
yeah.
Very comprehensive.
Right?
I think one thing to think about, and maybe it's in here, I haven't read every single red thing, but just sort of an exit strategy, that before you take a trip, if something were to happen and you needed to exit the country, that there be a plan in place.
Okay.
You know, it says if there's a travel warning, you know, you don't go, so I get that. But sometimes something may happen
Yes.
untoward and you need to get out. So maybe there ought to be some kind of,
Sure. I think
you know,
that,
wait, just some sort of, where's the nearest hospital, where's the nearest airport? You know, how do we exit if, you know, heaven forbid, it ever came to that?
yeah, I think typically, I shouldn't say typically, but in the last overseas trip, I think that information was facilitated by the company that managed the
Yeah,
travel, so we can
okay,
probably
good. Yeah,
just
as
pull that
long as
information.
it's there,
Yeah,
you know, that's all, that there's
right,
a way to get home.
okay, yep, that's a good point.
Is that it?
That's on the proposed policies.
Right.
And then we are on to approvals. So, discuss and approve.
Okay.
So may I ask for a motion to convert the 181st student day to a teacher work day, which would confirm the last student day as June 27th?
So moved.
How many snow days were there, 10?
9 or 10, it was too
Was there
many.
one in December? It's covered up, I forget. There's 9 showing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Oh, you know what, I just don't recall. I think we had 9. yeah.
October 30th
October
was the
30th,
first
yeah.
snow day?
But there wasn't one in December, so 9, okay.
I think 9
What
is
was
the right
the
number.
original planned last day?
The 17th. You know what?
No, it's
I'm,
Sunday.
that was
Sunday.
that was the original
18th,
calendar for
maybe?
18th. It was somewhere in that week.
So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Maybe the 15th.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, great.
When will graduation be set?
The high school has to come forward with a proposal, but I'm anticipating June 23rd.
Will we approve that next week?
Yes, that'll be on the
Will it-
agenda for
It'll be
next
announced
week.
sometime next week?
Okay.
Would it be safe to say, because the parents that have communicated with us relative to Monday, the June 24th, I guess, or 25th start date for camps, et cetera, those last 3 days, the 25th, 26th, are going to be half days. The earth will not stop rotating if their children are not here.
Well, they're school days. We're
Okay.
the Board of Education.
You know, I hear you.
I think if a parent has a particular concern, he or she should make contact with the school principal to
Okay.
discuss the particular concern.
Right, so let's do this. I think we need to communicate something to those parents because there are a number of them that are impacted by this.
And what about final exams? How,
Still playing right to the end, and I would say to Glenn's question, I mean, I think the message we've been sending and we will send out, we have a clear expectation that those are instructional days. I think we have to, support the integrity of the 180 days at this time.
Right.
But we are receiving some questions, and our message to the families has been, because we have been contacted by families who have, registered for a camp and then even deferred the camp when further snow days occurred. So I think we need to look at it through the lens of, the expectation is we are there, we're sending the same message to the teachers. But that if there's some flexibility required, I think we have to work with some of our families because they have down payments down and So we've had a number of those conversations already, and we'll communicate something more publicly.
Okay, I think we need to do something, I think, to address some of these issues and figure out how we're going to address them. Really.
And Soaring Ahead is confirmed for Thursday, June 21st, right?
Correct.
Well, it got moved.
Yeah.
It did.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, great.
Yeah, well, I think Middlebrook, it was announced to the Middlebrook community.
Oh, okay.
Do they know?
Right, well, that's good. That's good.
Next for discuss and approve food allergy and glycogen storage. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Next up, health assessments and immunizations.
Move to approve.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That's approved. Attendance of non-resident students.
Move.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, that's approved. We'll rip through those babies. Now we are open to the comments from the public section of our meeting. Is there anyone from the public who would like to come forward and offer any comments? Mr. Priest.
My name is John Priest. I live at 19 Fairview Lane, and I have two daughters in third grade at Miller Driscoll. I want to thank the Board of Ed for your work and your time, and both doctors, Kevin Smith and Chuck Smith, for making their time available and the communication that they've had with me personally and the staff in our town. So I'm here tonight to talk about the recent situation and what was addressed in Cider Mill over the last few days. I've been a professional educator for 25 years, and I've worked with children my entire life. I have a master's degree, a doctoral degree in instructional leadership, and I have no intention of trying to impress any of you with that, because most of you are a lot brighter and smarter than I am. But what I do offer is a perspective as a lifetime educator who's living in this town, an educator who's extremely familiar with the workings of this town for the past 15 years. And I've had the joy of knowing some of you all that time and your children. I'm blessed to live here, and I'm blessed to have the job that I do. My wife and I didn't move to this town because we heard what amazing schools Wilton had. And we didn't move to this town because we had heard that the teachers were highly qualified and passionate. We moved to the town because I had spent the early part of my career working in districts throughout Western Connecticut, but I came to teach in Wilton, and I was blown away. We moved to Wilton because we watched our daughters come home from the 3s and the 4s preschool program, the peer mentor program, speaking compassionately from their hearts about kids with special needs. I said to my wife, Heather, we have to move to Wilton because I want our girls to experience the teachers, the administrators that I work alongside every day. We moved to Wilton for an unending list of inspirational and really highly qualified educators like Carol Maxwell, who taught my daughter Addie to love a subject she was very weak in and still struggles with, but loves nonetheless because of her. We moved here because school administration understood that the parents' dedication to the quality of education offered fertile ground for teachers to work in and children to thrive in. They understood that state-mandated tests were an annoying reality, but the greater reality was the continual success of these Wilton graduates as they moved on to the finest institutions. And we've seen that, those real accolades listed. They understood that if a standardized test actually measured everything teachers were doing in the classroom, something was really wrong. We didn't move here to have our daughters come home from school to tell us that they weren't going to have social studies class, for a month or so, but instead needed to spend 30 to 45 minutes doing test readiness for the smarter, balanced assessment. This is a monster that we have to live with, but we're partially responsible for creating. I mean, be clear, I'm not angry because I'm a social studies teacher. That's not it. I'm not. I'm furious and I'm sad because the narrative being developed seems to be that the SBA is a good test, and the more our instruction looks like the test, the better. Nothing is further from the truth. I'm pragmatic, I get it. I know what those scores mean in our town, and I understand that the general public can't see the magic that's conducted in these classrooms day in and day out. They can't see the impossible work that our teachers and our administrators do every minute. But I do. The instruction is dynamic. It involves students actively engaging in multimodal receptive learning and differentiated expressive learning. It's inspirational, and it looks nothing like a test question on a Chromebook with 4 choices. I don't care how similar the answers are, especially at the elementary level. My daughters are great readers, thanks to their teachers. They love their novels. They already hate News ELA. And if you know what that is, we use it in our schools a lot. You know what they love? They love experiential units, like the Oregon Trail. My daughters go to amazing schools with amazing teachers and administrators, and they're doing impossible work. I feel blessed to live in this town, but we're losing our way. Over the last 25 years, I've been able to, as an educator, live in this uncomfortable spot where I took the standardized test and we dealt with it and felt a little dirty about it, but we always prepared for it, and our kids crushed it. But we need to flip the narrative and our focus. Recently, I heard a man who I have tremendous respect for, and I hope he gets to see this presentation, Paul Schluntz. He was speaking to a group of people, and he said, the teachers in this building and district would tear down this school and build it brick by brick if they felt that they would have a say in teaching the right way. And we don't feel like that's happening. So please consider, as we move forward, the work we're doing and what good teaching is. I really thank you for your time, and that's all I have.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to offer any comments? Yes.
My name is Susan Graybill. I live on New Canyon Road. I hadn't planned to say anything, and I may even start to cry because I love what he just said. John Priest was my colleague at Middlebrook, and I worked with Paul Schluntz. And it is so true that you all need to listen to your teachers. You need to let them be part of the building of the curriculum. It's what I spoke about last spring, and nothing has been done. But John is absolutely right. And Paul is the master teacher. And he's been there for, I don't know, centuries, I guess. But he taught me, I'm older than he is, 15 years older, but he taught me how to be a better teacher when I came to Middlebrook. And when I got to be a sub the last 3 or 4 years, I had a chance to go throughout the high school and Middlebrook as a sub, and I was blown away by the teachers' intelligence and their creativity and their dynamism and the beautiful relationship they had with their kids. You can see it, you can feel it in the classroom when you go in there as a sub. And then I had a chance then, of course, to visit with their colleagues on the teams or in the departments. And I do feel that, it wouldn't matter to me what the teachers decided. If the teachers had a chance to work together and to have some input in your curriculum planning, whatever they decided, it wouldn't matter to me. I'm old, I'm retired, and I would be content knowing that those inspired people had a chance to have a say. But I don't feel that they have been asked. And I feel like curriculum changes, I can only speak for middle school and high school because I'm not in the elementary school. But I feel like that the teachers have not been invited to participate in the planning or even to go back and make a comment about, give you some feedback about how it's been working for the last 3 years. And I don't have little kids like John does now, but I think you should listen to him. And I think you should come and, well, it's too bad that Board of Ed doesn't always get to be in the classroom because it's magic. And it's the teachers like Paul who teach from their heart, who have instincts about what kids need. And it doesn't have to be tuned in to planning for a test. I don't know what 8th grade teachers are doing this year. I haven't been there. But I sure hope you listen to what John said and that you start paying attention to what those teachers would want to offer you in your curriculum planning, because they know, they're in the classroom. They know better than anybody what ought to be happening, okay? And maybe I won't have to say this in a town meeting. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. Okay, thank you very much. The next meeting of the Board of Education will be 1 week from tonight, Thursday, April 5th.